Ready? All right. Oh, this looks like a spirited crowd. And I guess it's not here for the CIP discussion. Okay, probably not.
No.
Mike, I'll give you the floor and you can get us started.
Sure. As I'm sure you recall, we had a study session presentation on the topic of childcare and in Salina on the 9th of September, apparently. And at the conclusion of that, you indicated that you'd like to bring the group back, and you had some questions and follow-up discussion that you wanted to have. I have tried to facilitate that a little bit and emailed you for any questions you might have, and I didn't receive any response. In passing, and speaking with some of you, I know some of you expressed concern about the breadth of the problem and whether ultimately the ask was $100,000 to be applied towards wages, whether that was, number one, an effective solution, and then secondly, whether it was a sustainable solution. So I think that's a point of conversation. One other new piece of information, at least that I became aware of in the interim, is that Garden City has tried to take on a similar challenge. They feel like they have identified that it was through their economic development organization. The director of the economic development organization was interviewed in an article that I read. And they indicated that they feel like they've come up with a solution, so much so that they are going to be putting on what they call a boot camp in the first quarter of next year, with the intention of inviting communities to come and see the model that they've put together. I set up a conference call with the city manager, and he brought in the economic development organization director to kind of fill me in a little bit. They shared some information. They also indicated a willingness to have a Salina delegation be a pre-boot camp, and if we would give them feedback on kind of their presentation and how they conducted that, they do it at a discounted price. They didn't specify a price. They didn't go into any detail beyond that. With respect to their model, I certainly don't want to speak for them and don't want to claim to be an expert on what they've done, but they feel like they've put together an approach and numbers in light of state licensing requirements to the point that they've stood up a board of directors and an organization. I believe they've purchased a former nursing home with the intention of converting that into a child care facility, and they feel like they have a model that if employers then said, we would like you to operate a child care facility on our behalf, they have numbers and financing and rates that they think are workable. They've indicated basically $165 a week per child. Now we haven't got, I wasn't able to get specifics on ages. I know there's a significant difference between infants and I have to assume that they're talking about older children, but they have a lot of confidence in their model and claim to have a lot of numbers to back it up, and as I said, are getting ready to roll out this boot camp in the first quarter of next year, and really encouraged us to participate.
What all does their boot camp encompass? I mean, is that training for child care workers?
Yeah, my understanding is it's more this financial model, the community financial model they put together than training at that level.
Okay.
They
So,
put that on for us, when would they do it?
well, we'd have to go to Garden City, and I think the date could be if it's the pre-boot camp, they're willing to work with us and put something together. I haven't reached out to them any further in terms of price or timing. My expectation would be that we would want to put together, a representative group from Salina, not just city staff, and have them attend and see what Garden City has to offer. And some of the other things they mentioned were kind of a support network for stay-at-home or in-home providers and the paperwork and the licensing and those type of things as well. I did have a chance to talk with Liddell about that. As luck would have it, we crossed paths outside the building one evening, and so I think she's familiar with it a little bit too, and I had to joke with her a little bit. Garden City seems more confident about this than we generally are about many things here. We're trying to do the right thing, but I don't know that there's many things I would offer up that we're ready to train the state on. But they're offering it up, and they're real excited about it. So with that, I guess it'd be most appropriate to turn it over to you to pick up where your conversation left off and whatever it was that you wanted to discuss when you.
And the Garden
wrapped
City
up.
stuff's new from when we met last time, so I'm guessing you guys have had a chance to review that. What are your thoughts on what you've seen in their model?
The question that we had as we were reviewing it is, it doesn't define what the wages are. It shows $329,000 for salary within that structure, but I don't know what that means for pay for their employees. And I don't know what Garden City's issue is with the retention of current employees. It's a different response to what we know in Salina. The issue is wages for child care workers. So if it's just capacity and they're expanding capacity and they have workers ready to go to work, that's a different thing than I think what we're talking about.
I also had concerns because it really doesn't identify what their target population. Are they going to care for babies and toddlers? And that brings a whole different ball of wax to the discussion and even to their budget. And so I wasn't confident in their numbers yet, just because of.
It's just not defined in the presentation that we saw. So.
Yeah. And again, to Lori's point, I'm not 100% sure that Salina needs another child care center. I would probably say to you that we could use more family child care, and in our proposal that is included is to build up a pool of family child care. In fact, I've had many conversations about the same topic that they're looking at. It's a family child care network of, maybe 5 or 6 small businesses that support one another, and they have staff that come in to support them with outside resources. So I would love to see that in Salina, but this project that we're talking about today is really to stabilize center staff, bring in new center staff, and then in addition to support family child care.
Just define your family child care. How do you define that?
Family child care is they are licensed by the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and in licensing they're called daycare homes. Okay. I cannot bring myself to say daycare. I would prefer it to be family child care. So that is usually in a private home, usually one person providing the care. Almost always it is a female providing the care, to up to 10 children for one caregiver. Now, if that caregiver starts taking babies or toddlers, then the number will decline based on the total number of children. Now, there is another model, again, in a family's home, is where there's 2 providers. So the person who lives there, and then she has a staff person, and then they can care for 12 people. In Salina, we do have a number of facilities that are in that category. And in reality, they provide a lot of care for babies and toddlers for the community. They're also open, in many cases, longer hours, and are more flexible with a family schedule.
Now, I think we talked last time about licensed daycare or licensed family. What are we doing about the unlicensed group out there? Because I know there's a lot of them. I mean, it's.
Well, actually, and I don't want to spill the beans, but we are talking with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment right now to have a concerted effort to help people understand what licensing childcare does, what it looks like, what is included. But they're really even seeing from a state level that they're having a hard time getting new providers to come into the legal realm. And it's really about improving the quality of care. And yet some of that also includes some additional expenses. And from our perspective, we like to give grants or resources to those providers so that it offsets some of their costs.
And what was the estimate? We were down about, was it 700 or 1,000?
Yeah, we are down 88 child care providers, and so as of the last time that we looked, let me give you
For the number of children.
Oh,
The
I'm
slots.
sorry.
Yeah, that'd be roughly, 10, so it's about 8.
Slots. Yeah, 800. No, I have it right over here somewhere. It's roughly 800 children that will be impacted.
Right, and with the current facilities that you know of that are licensed right now, is the problem with them that there's just not enough of them, or that they are operating with reduced capacity because of reduced staff?
Both. So we dropped from 2012 from 207 child care providers in-home and licensed child care facilities to 127 in 7 years. So we're having people leave the field and not reopen facilities. And then the facilities that we do have are not running at 100% capacity because they can't hire people. And we have providers here if you want to ask them specific questions about that. So they're in there.
Is that a trend across the country?
Actually, it is. And again, when your economy is growing and booming and you can go to almost any retail or any other sector and get a job immediately, it typically then the early childhood field declines in that kind of environment when we especially need it to increase.
So those 100 workers are still, or 100, I'm not sure how many workers that would be, maybe 120. Are they still out there in the workforce just not doing anything, or they've moved on, or can you get them back?
I would like to say that with a living wage, we could get them back because they have the skills, the knowledge, the training, and in reality, many of them really love caring for young kids. But economically, they could not make it, the ends meet.
And that's the usual reason that they give for leaving?
Yes,
Within the
it's
center,
complicated.
yeah, I think within the
Okay.
center, I think that's definitely the case. I think within running a home childcare, then it's a different thing. You're
Yes.
inviting sometimes up to 10 families into your home, and it's wear and tear on your home,
Yes.
it's strain on your family relationships, and it's hard work. So depending upon what your home setting is, if you have my experience with my children, my provider had a wing of her house that was dedicated to nothing but childcare, and that was unusual, that she could just cordon that off, and that was childcare space, and the rest of her home was family space. But I don't think that's the
So are
normal.
you saying one child care provider can have up to 10
correct.
children?
Right.
What percentage?
And you said that they pay $165 a week per child?
That's the
That's
Garden City model.
Okay, what does our local,
Angie, do you remember?
I would be in a family. 125 probably.
I was just going through my tax returns from when my children were in childcare, and he's now 20, and I paid $130 a week 20 years ago. In-home infant care.
So you're saying it's dropped from 130 to 120 now?
We're not even keeping up.
But that
is what I'm saying.
but that was for infants.
Well, yeah, sure.
But it went down as they got older?
Yes.
Well, yeah, but they also went to, I'm just giving you a number for like $130 is what I paid in infant care 20 years ago. Literally.
I mean, I was just trying to figure out the.
You guys in the back, do you want to speak to your current rates?
We just raised our rates at Salina Childcare, and we're gonna charge $190 a week for infants coming in.
And of course, you're in a larger environment than a
Right.
house. I mean, I was just trying to calculate at if you take $130 a week at 10 children times 52 weeks, that's more money than, yeah.
There's a lot of things that you need to include in that. And we do a workforce study about every 3
And I guess
years.
that's what you're going to have to help me out here
Yes.
with, because,
Normally, a family childcare will be making anywhere between $18,000 to $19,000 a year. Because you have to remember that they're using their home as their business, they're buying the food for the children, they're providing the materials, the equipment, and so it isn't just a 10-to-1 kind of ratio. It's expensive, because then they also have licensing fees, they also have professional development that they have to attend, so there are costs that are sort of hidden.
now, can they not isn't there a state program where they can apply for food substance?
Yes.
I mean, for food,
Child,
Subsidy.
adult, and.
right? And what does that?
Child and
Yeah.
adult food
We
program.
sponsor some homes in Salina on that program through our center. It's a partial reimbursement for their food costs.
Right.
So it helps. Some accountants tell people to go ahead and take a deduction and not do the food program, but it helps a little bit with the food, but it would not cover the total food cost.
Right.
Do you have a ballpark percentage?
Honestly, I don't look at when I used to look at their tax returns, most of them they were not making much. I know, I couldn't even tell you.
And Elaine, last time you were here, didn't you say that the place you're at right now has got like you're down 5 or 6 staff members and you
Yes.
could take more
Yes.
if you
And
had that?
That's still correct. And I have some empty classrooms right now.
And raising
We're hoping that's our first step is to raise the rates across the board. But that's still just to kind of get us out of the situation that we've been in now, because we have been operating pretty close to, we have been operating at a loss right now, trying to dig out of it. So we're hoping by raising those rates, then I can add a few more people and start adding some kids. So. But it's a struggle, and it's a struggle with what I'm able to offer. And I've had some good people that have come and said, I want to work, and I can't come close to what they want. And that's 12 and 13 an hour. I said, I can't come close to that because the staff that I have right now that have worked with me for years and years are not making that.
Elaine, what's your typical staff wage?
Um,
Or your average wage?
We're a little bit different in that we have an older workforce that have been with us a while, and so some of our teachers are probably making 10 to 12, 13, that have been there for 20 plus years. I think it's probably, teachers at the Y even are like 9,
Our
10.
lead teachers come in, start at $10 an hour. Our assistants start anywhere from $7.25 to $8 an hour,
Right.
just based on
On
experience.
experience. That's where our assistants come into.
But if you remember the video that we showed the first time, parents can't really, it's hard for parents to afford to pay more, or the true cost. And so, and again, this is not an issue that is specific to Salina, it is across the country. And I think that we have an opportunity to at least put a cork in the hole so that we can build up the demand, build up the supply.
Yep.
And one of the things that has been brought up is sliding scale. We've heard this, if people can afford to pay more, they should pay more than other people. And we're looking at that and trying to figure out as a board how we can do that. It's a little difficult to budget. We don't have any grant or anything out there to make up the difference for those low-income families that can't afford that cost. So what I really struggle with is I don't want us to become that agency that we're out here for all of you that can afford it and the rest of you, sorry, but we need to make ends meet. So that historically has not been what our agency has wanted to do.
So I don't see how young couples do it. I really don't. I mean, if you have 1 or 2 kids and, I mean, it's according where the husband and wife is working at, but I mean, if there's not a lot of skills and they're working, I mean.
We had HR professionals in a meeting in August who were pregnant, earning respectable wages, professional workforce. Families are not having children because they can't find childcare. I mean, that was vocalized to us.
What percentage of the services provided are being provided by the one-off homeowner that has the 10 kids only, as compared to the larger centers? And how many centers are there in Salina?
There are 10 childcare centers in Salina, which include preschool category as well. No, I'm, 6 preschools, I'm sorry. And then there are 118 family childcare. So there again, that's that small business owner, 118.
So that's quite a big other percentage.
You
then.
know,
Yes.
And this granting program that you're proposing is, how does it break out between those two segments of the market, the center and the private person? Has everybody got the same access to this
Yes.
program?
It's based on their salary or their wage.
Now, when you break the homes down, what percentage of the kids are in the 10 centers as opposed to the 118? Is that like, is it a, excuse me, 50-50 split, or
No.
which one has more?
Angie, do you know that?
The home?
Home care.
Home care.
We have that data, but I didn't bring it.
Well, and the answer, I don't know the actual number, but it's clearly in
It
favor
is,
of
yes.
the home.
Yeah.
It just, is there any difference in, or has anyone looked at the readiness of the kids for, I guess you almost need to go to school to get into kindergarten nowadays, but at whatever point you start counting, is there a difference in the readiness in the kids who are at the child care centers as opposed to the homes?
What we see is the kids that haven't had any kind of early education experience are the ones that don't have what they need to enter kindergarten ready to learn.
So are the home,
Home providers and child care centers, both are providing quality. Some are not providing quality, but some are providing quality. I mean, it doesn't matter necessarily if you're in a center or in a home. All of those providers have access to support through Child Care Aware, through CAPS, early
And so there-
education
there's
programs,
training available for the
Yes.
home-based
Right.
home
care,
and center
know
providers.
what, they
Yeah,
should at
what
least try
quality
to teach.
care looks like, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Is there an underground level to this care? Like how many kids are in the home with 2 or 3 kids and they're taking care of their own kids and neighbor child?
Well, you don't have to become licensed if you're providing less than 5, is that right?
No, 3.
3. So if you're providing for your own kids,
Right.
providing care for your own kids, and you have a neighbor that you're caring for, you don't have to become licensed, and we don't have that kind of data.
It's less than 3 or at 3? So 2 you can do, 3 you have to get licensed.
Is that right?
What if you have 3 of your own?
Does that include your own?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Does that include your own?
I think it's 3 and under.
And it does not include your own.
Doesn't include your own.
It's pretty minimal.
So, I don't want to misstate anything. Could you remind us of the request, the proposed
Thank you.
use, the duration, and what it will, how it will move the ball forward?
We are requesting $100,000, and that will be matched with other private dollars. In fact, we already have a foundation who has already given us $100,000, so your city money would be matched right away. And yet, we are going out and then soliciting business to also really increase that. We need approximately $800,000 in a year to do the things that we really truly believe are needed right now in Salina. And then, in addition to that, we will create an endowed fund that will hopefully get to 10 million as quickly as possible, so that we don't have to keep coming back annually or, frequently to receive additional resources. That endowed fund would then carry us forward in the needs that we've estimated.
So are you going to be raising 800,000, do you anticipate raising $800,000 a year annually?
For 3 years.
For 3 years, thank you. I was looking for, and I didn't end up getting that, the presentation that you had last time. I was looking for that before I came and I couldn't remember. So it's the $100,000 for 3 years. The 3-year commitment? Or
I'm asking you for a 1-year commitment.
1 year, okay.
I'm not
Okay.
asking for more at this point.
All right, I was just trying to wrap my mind around it. So, okay, so raising $800,000 over for several years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
Building
that
your way
money
up
will
to
be used
10
in
million.
what way? The
That would be
800,000, just
used to
strictly?
increase wages of existing employees that are in the field and existing caregivers in the field, from whatever they're earning now to $12 an hour. And then increasing the in-home care providers by 50.
By 50. 50 what?
50 people. Recruiting
by
50
recruiting,
participants.
okay, you said recruit.
Yeah, yeah.
Increased to 50. so
Yeah,
increased
yeah.
50.
So looking for 50 additional in-home caregivers to participate in that program and to have their wages supplemented. And then providing professional development along to maintain that quality of care.
Now, is $12 an hour enough when Target's paying 13?
You know, I would love to start at 15, but that would even blow this $800,000 even further out of reach. It will help significantly, because there are many people who really have the desire to care for young kids. They see that as part of their mission, they see that as, you know, helping a community, and so they would be willing to take a lesser paying job so that they know that they're making a difference in the life of a young child.
Okay, and two other questions. One, if you were to pay a market rate hourly wage for what the assistants and leads do, what would a theoretical rate for the parent be per week? And I don't know if that number is 13 an hour, 15 an hour, whatever, or that, if y'all toss that question around.
No, I mean, we just took a stab at it and raised, we're trying, we went from 160 to 190 with infants and 150 to 175 toddlers. And just per week, yeah, just.
And you're currently paying your assistants,
Our
your entry level?
$8.
$8.
So if you're licensed, do you tell the child care provider what they need to charge per child, or they charge whatever they want to?
Right.
And so if they're charging $5 an hour, you're talking about stepping in and, no.
No, we actually just surveyed all of the child care providers in town, and there is one that has a very low, her hourly wage is quite low, and I think we would decline unless she is willing to make that commitment to step it up to the you know, in the neighborhood of what the other centers, because that's really not fair to their staff. And there's a lot of turnover in that facility as well, which is detrimental to kids as well.
So the math that you and I discussed is if it's $4 an hour from $8 to 12.
Right.
The 100,000 from the city equates to 12, just shy of 12 people that you could help. So how would you administer that? In the light of the equity questions, how would that be administered?
I'm not 100% sure I'm in.
You're asking how those funds are distributed?
Well, yeah, how are you
Okay.
going to
Yes.
choose the 12 over everyone else? And
Well, I don't think we can implement and do the 12. We would not be targeting and starting a program until we were able to do what we said we were going to do and have that pool of $800,000 raised. So that we're impacting the current workforce. And that it's not about picking, well, you work at Salina Childcare and you work at the YWCA or the YMCA and you're a home care provider and you're gonna have to apply and we're gonna have to pick somebody. That's not what we wanna do. We don't wanna have to play that game. We wanna raise the money and impact our community.
Because coming out of the EDO, that was, I think, was where it got left off. There was a recognition of a need for a sliding scale and some type of approach to administration. So that's where my question came from. But if I understand you, your goal then would be to have the 800,000 in place and raise wages across the board?
Correct.
Well, Liddell, didn't you do that previously in a program?
Yes,
So you might want to
absolutely.
talk a little bit about how
Yeah.
you administered that previously?
Right.
Well, it was CAPS actually that administered that program, and we did that for 12 years. I was not employed at that time, but looking back at the historical data, that was through the Smart Start program through the state of Kansas. Those were tobacco settlement dollars that were originally earmarked specifically for this issue. And in 2012, the state changed the way they wanted those dollars to go, and they went towards early identification of developmental delays. And so they refocused that and said, and that's when it stopped. So if you look at 2012 and our numbers where we were, those people, those wages were being supplemented at that time the same way that we're asking for it to be established today. And the carrot for them to participate in the program was they had to have longevity in the field, they had to have certain educational requirements, they had to participate in professional development, so that we were also increasing the quality of care in our community at the same time as increasing those wages. So there were scholarships to get providers who had just gotten their CBA accreditation, get them into an associate's program, and those that had an associate's program to work towards a bachelor's. So there were a lot of opportunities for our caregivers to really learn what quality looked like. And I think the data shows those dollars went away, and our workforce now, 7 years later, we are where we are, I feel like, because of that. During that time frame in 2001 was when that program started, and at that time we had 147% turnover in our, according to the data that I have read, 147% turnover in child care, and by the time we were done, we were down to 23% turnover.
So if you're seeking $800,000 for 3 years, you say, is that what you're trying to,
Each year, 100,000, yes.
you get it the first year? I mean, what happens if you fall short that second and third year? I mean, after you've already went in and you.
That's why we're seeking long-term pledges,
Okay.
long-term commitment from our community.
Because, I mean, you know, we've seen that happen before where, you know, you get your first year and you've raised all these folks to $12 an hour, and then you go back the next year and says, we don't have the money to do it again.
Well, and just administratively, the way that looks is that you bonus them every so often. So you're not actually, you're not paying them every week an additional dollar, but they prove that we've done this quarter. And so then the bonus check is issued, and then you do this quarter. So the base obviously is staying the same, if you will. And the way that gets increased is by checking the boxes.
And I'm not saying this in, necessary. I'm just struggling with the administrative part of this. I'm just going to look at Elaine, come and pick on her. If you have someone making $14 and you have somebody making $8, do you bring that $8 person to 12 and the 14-hour person stays where they're at?
There's.
Because you're talking about bringing wages to $12 an hour.
There is some longevity money in this grant, for those that have been in the field, but honestly, when we were looking at it, because we need more help with the people right now that are making the $8 an hour, that there's not much in the longevity piece of it. We just can't afford to do it. And so there's a little bit, there's like $600 or $800 that might go to some of those people. So the bulk of this money is going to go to those $8 people that we need to keep.
And then with the in-home daycare, if you have someone that has 4 children, you have somebody that has 10, how do you balance that, trying to get them to the $12?
We've talked about that, and we've talked about
'Cause I go back to,
setting a minimum level and saying, if you're gonna be participating in this grant, that you need to be at X capacity, and we haven't set that.
And what is that
We
capacity?
haven't set that number yet. We really were looking at, on average, full capacity, right? Those numbers, Angie?
You need to set the 3 qualifiers, but yeah.
Yeah. When we were doing those 50 new providers, we were basing that on 10 kids in those.
What about current providers?
Current providers will have to set that standard and say, if you're gonna participate in the program, you need to be running at least, and I would say at least 75% capacity, have 8 kids that you're providing care for, because the whole purpose is to increase capacity within our community.
Right.
So if you are self-selecting that as a home care provider, that's your choice, but that means you're choosing not to participate in this program. We recognize that as a coalition.
How attractive does that look for the workers that are earning like $8 an hour to have basically kind of like a deferred compensation package? I mean, if they're not going to be seeing it in their wages every week, I mean, how do you feel like that's going to be attractive enough for them to say, well, your quarterly bonus is,
Right.
you know, is coming up, or would it, I mean, because if you're making 8 or 10 or shoot, $12 or $14 an hour, I mean, you need it now. So, I mean,
That's not how it worked before.
okay,
I'll just say that before we did quarterly bonuses
And it worked.
It seemed to work.
okay.
And we covered some of that, and it matches up with what Lori's telling you, that I think for 4 years, the Salina Regional Health Foundation was kind of a local match to the
Right.
state funding, and then the city contributed about $85,000 a year for 4 or 5 years. And until it veered, you know, in a whole other direction. So it was, and the local funding was helpful, but the state funding was sizable. And I don't claim to know enough about the Garden City model, but one thing I would tell you is they're pretty adamant in their communication that they have a non-subsidized model. They think and I've shared with Liddell, I think this is an economic challenge that is beyond Salina, and they think they've cracked that nut.
It's non-subsidized by the city, Garden City.
Right.
It's subsidized.
Well,
from the companies.
they think their numbers work. Now, they are trying to get, you know, donate, they expect an employer, if they want a employer-based provider to pay for a building, and they're trying to raise contributions towards buildings and maintenance, but they think, and I'm just parroting what's been told to me.
Right, but we don't know what those wages are.
Right.
In that structure. We don't know what that average,
Yep.
I have a lot of questions. I would love to hear their model.
I-
There was not enough information in the material that I read to
And what
feel
will-
confident.
And I'm,
Yeah.
I'm passing through maybe 50% of what was in there, admittedly so.
Well, there's maybe a good member for the commission if we send some representation out there to do boot camp. I mean, I think it's worth hearing what their full model and having, getting the scope of that, whatever we decide to do with this proposal here. I see us, myself personally, comfortable with the source of funds that we have for this for 1 year, but beyond that, then we got problems, because that's funds that we're discussing designating for this project are declining in base.
Right.
So, but I'm interested to see if you guys can get some traction and what data we get from it in a year's time.
Well, at the same time that Lori talks about, there was a program here in Salina. We also ran a very similar program statewide, and it was called Wages. And again, we have some very successful data that shows that, again, when a provider is given that incentive to stay for 6 months, they do. But then we also had a program that was called Teach, and we did that here in Salina as well, and that got people more educated, formal education, so that they would then go up the scale of the wages supplement. So we know that these programs do work. We've got history, we've got the studies that have shown that. So it is a viable option for you to consider.
Funding source, Economic Development Fund from the
At the
sales tax
moment,
fund?
Right. The sales tax contribution to economic development is what we targeted, and, you know, the EDO discussed it and made the recommendation as if it were an economic development initiative. I don't think you can argue that it has an economic impact, positive and, if it's successful, positive, or commercially negative. As Commissioner Ryan mentioned, there's about $700,000 in that fund, and if you look at our annual revenue generation with our annual commitments, that fund balance is on a decline.
Very much so.
So if we were gonna try to remain even, I think we would have to look at existing expenditures and the amount of $100,000 to cease and redirect funds to this project for the 1-year contribution.
Yep, with the 50 new providers, that would eat up the entire deficit that we have now. And I don't know, Mitch, do you have any, off the top of your head, what percentage of new workers coming in at the airport are young enough to have new families? Because I'm assuming there's gonna be a little, some demand with those workers as well.
I think it's 83 or 84%.
On average in the workforce that need childcare.
Okay. And what's the typical health insurance status of the current workers?
Oh, of the current workers,
Zero.
zero. We had offered health insurance for years. Several years ago, we had to quit. And so they're low income enough. They were low income enough that they were in the gap and they couldn't get on the exchange. So they couldn't get insured at all. So I had some employees that fell into that range. And so some of them are on the exchange now.
What, I'm just dreaming out loud, but it might be worthwhile calling friends in Topeka to see if child care workers automatically qualify for Medicaid. Just because of what they do. I don't know if it would get pushed through as an emergency legislation, but it would certainly help with recruiting, because that's something that you wouldn't have to pay, or they wouldn't have to pay out of their.
They do new employees within the first 1 or 2 weeks of employment catch something and they're around all these kids. So it's just typical that new employee's gonna call in going, I feel terrible, I got a fever, and it's like, yeah, you've been in the building. So that's true. And then those poor people, they don't have health insurance. One of the requirements is that within 30 days, a new employee has a physical, and they can't afford to, they don't have insurance, and so they can't even go get that. They struggle.
Is that something health department could help out with?
I don't know.
I mean, as far as in-kind service?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, or Salina Regional Foundation or something. I mean, I don't know, but it might be, if that's a stumbling block, maybe that's, it's easy for me to give away ComCare's services.
See how that works out for you.
Out of the 118 in-home daycares, do you have a breakout of how many children's in each home? Is it 4 or 5? So you have a list?
Oh, yes, we know, but I don't know off the top of my head. One of our services that we provide is for families to search our database to find an opening. And so we know where there are openings in all 105 counties. So yes, in Salina County. Off the top of my head.
Yeah, I didn't, but I mean, we do have that.
Yes, we
data.
do. I think there's also a lot of conversation statewide now about public-private partnerships. The governors had a conference a couple of weeks ago, and even there they were talking about how important it is for there to be a public component of support for early childhood and a private support. And so that's what we're offering to you today.
Any sense of timeline of when you might hit your 800, assuming the city's in for 100?
In my best case scenario, it would be January 1st. It might be the end of the first quarter of 2020, but we are losing childcare providers the longer that we wait. And so we're going to take this very seriously and get those dollars raised. And we're not going to stop with just the 800,000. We're going to keep on going.
Right. Yeah, I was just trying to get a sense for,
Right.
where you were going, like, in total.
Right.
Because I can't remember which other commissioner said, I mean, I'd hate to, like, get you set up with $100,000 and then, it needs to be, considered as part of a multi-stage or multi-year commitment to get where you want to be.
Well, we wouldn't turn that away.
Well, I know.
But we are also realists and
Yeah.
know what
Yeah.
your circumstances are
Right.
from the city's budgetary perspective as well.
So, Commissioner, go ahead.
Does this, if a business was getting a subsidy, for lack of a better term, do you have restrictions on how much of a rate increase can be brought up during that time period?
Actually, a coalition of people have been working on this, and they have been looking at the particulars. We're having policy discussion, and those kinds of things. We'll be working through the coalition to make those decisions. But yes, we're not just going willy-nilly, and we're making very sound decisions. That's why we had one of our staff call all of the child care centers to just kind of get a grasp of how many people would be eligible. And so, that coalition is being used as a sounding board, as a driver of good decision-making. So it isn't just a staff of a couple people that are thinking about it. It is very deliberate, and we'll have written policies so that if another community wants to do something similar, we'll have it tailor-made for them.
Well, if you're looking for a consensus, I mean, I still, no, well, no, and I still have questions. I think obviously your program's it's developing, it's evolving or whatever. But I don't think that there's any better investment that we can make than in the children in our community. And as we sit up there at dais every week, sometimes sometimes the things we spend our money on, we don't always agree or whatever, but I think this would be a really good investment, so I'm okay with moving forward.
So am I.
I am as well.
Guess I'd like to run to Garden City real fast, just to see if there are any material.
I don't think we
If
should
there any-
overlook knowing about that.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we should send representation and have the boot camp.
Because I'm assuming some of the same folks who you will be approaching
both.
for the 800,000, you're going to be approaching for the $10 million. And there's a plan to
There is plan.
shake that much money out.
So on the side of the public information campaign, do
Yes,
you have
there is.
a plan to put that to the public directly, that people that are just
Yeah,
interested?
so part of
to
the
share?
grant that Liddell referred to actually is to help develop that plan. And so by getting a staff person, I mean, believe it or not, the rest of us have full-time jobs,
Yeah.
but this isn't our focus every single day. And so to have somebody that can be dedicated to develop that marketing plan and actually go and be the face of the project is what, at the point where we are now. So having the vote of confidence from the city, I think would be really helpful to us to say, we have this investment from our private foundation and our city commission is supporting the plan. We're a fourth of the way there, so.
And I appreciate being offered the opportunity to get in, to be able to speak up and be in at this level. And also, I think it's a pretty reasonable ask considering the dollars that are involved in the project. So,
Thank you.
there's a lot of amounts you could ask for.
Are the
possible.
larger employers being asked to fund part of the 800,000 as well?
Mhm.
Any responses yet?
Well, again,
I mean, I don't need names, obviously.
Again, we've been sort of waiting on you all, because again, when we can go out and say, we have that public-private dollars, I think that will speak volumes. And so we haven't really focused there yet, but we will, as soon as you guys say yes.
So this year, funding from the Economic Development Fund, or,
And the board
Cut.
When we
suggested that,
say
I mean, that's why we're here,
this year,
correct?
Probably,
That they,
yeah.
I think 2020.
or should I be looking at Debbie?
No, I'm looking up into space, sorry. I don't know that we have the ability to move any other expenditures around in 2019. So if we say that we want to fund it out of 2019, I guess we can make some offsetting adjustment in 2020 to try to catch that fund balance back up. But so if you want to do it, let me ask you this. It seems like there's interest in pursuing the Garden City pre-boot camp. Don't know the timing or the cost of that, but I assume we could afford that out of the Economic Development Fund. So you want to pursue that and pursue the development of their details and that funding arrangement kind of simultaneously, and we can bring all that back to you. My concern is I don't know how quickly the Garden City pre-boot camp can get turned around, but assuming that it can, we could probably come back with what that does to the Economic Development Fund balance, the details that they're describing, and Garden City details.
because you may even come up with a hybrid approach. They may have some ideas about securing private contributions to fund their program that could be used towards the, either 10 million or a larger plan to fund some structures.
Would it be funded in 2019 or 2020?
Well,
Or,
And
This year.
it really depends on when it is they're wanting, the
Right.
conditions under which you want to release the funds and the timing under which they would like to receive the funds. If it's a
When you're
pledge
talking 2020,
towards-
are you talking fiscal year
Calendar
2020?
year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, fiscal
July
calendar year,
1?
that's it. No, our calendar and fiscal year.
Yours.
yeah,
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 we count.
January 1.
See, that would be.
I would think 2020.
Yeah,
I don't, we're not gonna have
Yeah.
funds raised.
yeah.
Where'd the money come from before, like 10 years ago?
It was out of the sales tax allocation. We had outside agency allocations that they would make on an annual basis.
The alcohol? To come
No,
out
it
of,
was- I think
something we got
I
out
refer to them as human
It's
services.
called
Yeah.
the human services allocation, and it was a certain percentage of that sales tax.
It's a
And that's
quarter
where this
cent.
piece came out of it.
So Sane SART was another one that was funded. We had a handful of different requests that were funded. And I don't know that I found a paper trail other than the state funding kind of went away and ours did too.
Liddell, is there any anticipation, or Lori, conversations at the state level? I mean, because obviously this isn't just a unique problem to Salina, that they're going to be implementing any new funding sources or something that, like in the future that, we might see that sales tax coming back to us that we could then, forward on to,
I haven't heard discussions about the sales
or,
tax.
yeah, any
But there
kind of-
are a lot of resources that are being pursued right now, and my guess is that Kansas will be quite successful. But again, when they come there, then it isn't just low to one community. It would have to be spread out. So yes, right now there are so many conversations happening. I know that there is a private group that is going to North Carolina to hear more about teaching wages. So again, Salina is not different in that we're all talking about early childhood, and that's wonderful. But do I know specifics? Not yet.
And one of, does our money come with little proviso that if the amount is not in other words, none of it gets spent until you reach a certain threshold?
Perfectly appropriate.
Well, we already have $100,000 in the bank, and that was from a private foundation.
And what umbrella do these dollars go into?
They're the fiscal agent. Childcare will be the fiscal agent.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's worthwhile. I just see the administrative and I see all kinds of, I mean, I'm glad somebody else is looking at it. I see all kinds of issues there, of challenges when I'm trying to be fair to everyone.
Yep.
I don't know how you account for expenses for somebody when you're trying to get to that $12. Because I'm going to be honest, when I calculate somebody has 8, they're well over $12 an hour. I mean, they're getting no subsidy. So if I can go back.
Without expenses.
No, you add expenses. I mean, without expenses, that's 50. They're at 52,000, 8 at 125 for 52 weeks.
If they're-
So-
And they're providing for 3 to 5-year-olds.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. But what I'm getting
There's
at
a lot.
is you've got to be careful that you don't get to the
Right.
point where I got 8, but hell, I can drop back to 5 and still make the same amount of money.
Yes.
We've defeated our purpose. I mean, it's
Exactly
much
right.
easier to look at the ladies in the back row that are paying $8 an hour or 12 and say, I can raise their wages, help bring people in. The in-house daycare, I see all kinds of
But if I understood you correctly,
concerns.
you're working on those details as we
Yeah.
speak.
And like I said, that's something you're gonna have to, but I could see almost having a reverse of what's happening, depending on how you subsidize some of that.
When we implemented wages, and that was for family childcare and centers, family childcare had to provide their tax returns. So we knew what they
Yeah.
were, what their
Yeah.
home take was. So again, trust me, if
Yeah,
they're
and that's what
making
you're gonna have to, I mean, but
$30,000
that's a lot of administration on 118,
And
but
we have
yeah.
been doing that in the
Okay.
past.
Cool, okay.
And is there a geographical restriction on where the child has to live? i.e. the city, the county, the near county, so we
We
don't
were
have folks
looking at
in
Saline County
McPherson dropping their
caregivers,
kids off.
that's what we were looking at. Hadn't thought of that angle, I don't know.
What does that
How
mean?
many
That someone from
If you do a
McPherson
great
driving
program, I
here
mean,
and
put
putting
folks in
their kids
McPherson will drop their kids off on the way to
Yeah.
work.
I mean, I would say if they're getting childcare here, they're employed in Saline
You would
County.
think.
If they don't live here,
You're helping the employer.
that would be a really.
Either one would be perfect. Okay.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, we'll pursue the pre-boot camp with Garden City, we'll pursue the details of this on the presumption that we're supportive of freeing up $100,000 out of the Economic Development Fund for child care purposes.
If we have the opportunity to go with you, we would love that.
No, that's my thought. is
Yeah.
We need to put
Good.
together,
We don't know much about childcare.
Right.
It's been a long time since
Well,
I deal with
I
childcare.
thought I should at least say that,
No, I'm
because,
sorry, I thought-
assuming
Yeah.
things get us.
no, the
I'm sorry,
expectation would be.
Was there ever an attachment, this may sound cruel and I apologize, that it has to be for a working parent?
Well,
Or a
we're-
parent
It's for the
who's-
child, it's for the child care providers. We're not providing subsidy to the working parents.
Right, but the subsidy is for workers to take care of children
Right?
of
Working
people
parents.
who we would hope in the grand scheme of things
Right.
are
We're
working.
Right. There was some discussion at the EDO level about how you sort out that level of detail in terms of not only the child care provider, but the family that's receiving the benefit.
Right, because if I'm in a large employer, you want me to contribute, if I need
I can't
100,
imagine and
if I need 200 slots, it's
paying
for my
for
200.
childcare that there aren't very many people using childcare that don't need it. That aren't employed
Or in school.
or in school.
I've not run across that.
Yeah, I think the EDO concern was because there's such a shortage,
Right.
that are the openings benefiting families
That
that,
need it.
right, income-wise,
Right.
need it compared to first come, first serve, taking advantage of the openings that are created regardless of your income and status of the family. Basically, a higher income family might benefit at the detriment of a family
Right.
that needs it worse.
Because there are a lot of people who are staying at home, or the kids are home because there are no slots.
Right.
But the minute a slot open up, the kids will be out the house. But that doesn't necessarily mean that mother or father is financially in a situation where they have to work. They just want the kids out the house.
I would think that would.
That sounds bad, I apologize.
No,
but-
I understand the concern.
I mean,
think
I
that-
can't
and it may only apply in like 0.1%, in which case it's
Right,
not
I
a
think
big
it's
issue.
very
but-
small percentage.
Plus, it's also important for the child to be in the early
Yeah.
education setting regardless of what the income level of the parent is
True.
in. That child needs to have that structure, that the income level doesn't affect what that child needs to be prepared to go to school.
Kindergarten readiness.
And maybe the more interesting thing to me is that there are parents staying home that has something to contribute to the local
That
economy.
that is
They have a doctor
absolutely
in
right.
there, but they're
Right.
staying home
Right.
to provide for
And,
their
I
children.
thought Dr. Zuccarelli's a perfect example.
Yeah.
She came to our dinner, or our breakfast in December with her baby on her head because she does not have childcare. And her husband is that caregiver the majority of the time. So, I mean, it is not just a low income issue. It is a capacity issue in our community.
Well, as we bring employees for large new employers from outside our community, they're not coming with grandparents or aunts and uncles a lot of the time. So you don't have these familial networks like we do for people who already live here to engage with childcare. So they're going to have to find care somewhere else.
Okay. We just need a big bus to go to.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many they planned to.
One of those village bus line things, that's a long ride.
3.5 hours.
No doubt, it
Right.
would be representative of the community. We'll have to
I got
figure
it.
out what their intentions
If you're
are.
with me,
Put a group
I can
together.
get you there. 3.5.
What if we brought them here?
I had to make a lot of trips there a few years ago. And I was just like 90 miles an hour is fast, and it's just like, no, we're not stopping for anything.
Part of their economic development plan, we have to go with that.
Yes,
Twins
that's
jet
right.
board.
It is.
Garden City's only 60 miles.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
Actually, I think their resources are there. but I could be wrong.
Well, thank you
Okay.
very much for your concern.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming.
Appreciate that.
We have to stay, but, well, I mean, let that.
We wedged that topic into this study session thinking it would take 30 minutes.
Sorry.
Yeah, I figured 8 kids are, that's 50.
I know.
I'm like, you cannot tell me that person's salary. I know. So that's where administrative.
Short Debbie's time.
You would find out better than I do, 'cause you have young
Maybe splitting Debbie across two
I don't know how much it takes
Well, we know that. I mean,
for them to keep a rotating
Can you listen
thing
faster?
of, you know, materials form.
This is something you've seen before. It's nothing new. There's really no new,
Well, we can tell which departments are involved, judging by who's
that's right.
in the room.
Who's in the room? That's right.
Chief's always here.
So I didn't want to cut off that last conversation. So we cut Debbie, we'll see what we can accomplish and we have to roll over another study session.
What's next week's study session?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I'm just feeling like you got a lot of stuff to cover.
Maybe EMS.
Yeah, I think it is. That's right. I was trying to think of it.
I'm sorry, what did you say you thought it was?
EMS deployment.
Oh, right.
And that he is traveling out of town.
You want to sit here? No. I'm not that blind. That's sure.
All right, Debbie, the floor is yours.
Okay. I promise I can talk fast if you can listen fast. Today we're talking about the 2020 Sub-CIP and CIP. We did look at these over the summer when we did budget, but this is just an opportunity to refresh our mind on what projects and purchases we have in these two programs and give you an opportunity to discuss if there's anything we want to take out, because we will be bringing this back to commission for a resolution to adopt this later in November. So first of all, I wanted to kind of give you an overview of what, we'll do Sub-CIP first, an overview of kind of what those categories mean that we have, that we've given you. CIP planning is really reserved for cost of studies and plans and things like that related to future projects. So if we have a project that we're thinking about we might need to do, this is kind of a feasibility study or something like that. Buildings and facility is truly what that means, improvements or repairs to existing facilities. Those funds come from sales tax. The first one does too, comes from sales tax. Park improvements are for the alcohol, special alcohol park fund. Those are statutorily for purchase and establishment or maintenance of expansion of park and recreation services programs or facilities. That comes from special alcohol fund. Streets is construction and anything related to the maintenance of our streets or highways. There's three kind of funding sources for that. We have the gas tax, sales tax, which we have allocated money from there, and we also apply for the Kansas Federal Fund Exchange Program annually for some dollars to provide those improvements. And then the system enhancements is truly for the water and wastewater fund to provide enhancements to those systems on an annual basis. So it's kind of their maintenance, routine maintenance program. And then the last one, and the one that we get the most requests for, is vehicles and equipment. And this is truly replacement of vehicles and or equipment that staff has out in the field. And we have funding in there from sales tax, sanitation, solid waste, and the water and wastewater fund.
And it's used for the dedicated purpose, it's not.
Correct.
Sanitation doesn't pay for
Right.
parks, as an example.
Well, we could have them, but not there. This tab is just a summary of where the budgeting money is coming from by fund, so you can see where it's coming from across the top and what it's being used for across the left-hand axis. Just gives you an idea how much we're spending on vehicles, for example, parks and building and facilities. The first category, we did reduce this in the 2020 budget from $250,000. This is the CIP planning. We have $100,000 allocated to this category. We don't have any current plans for this. However, if something comes up, then we come back to you with permission if it's over $20,000 to use those funds from that. If a project comes up in 2020, this kind of gives us that reserve to use to look, if we need to do feasibility studies or something like that on that. Stop me if you have any questions, because you know I'm going to fly through this.
Is that a wage study or is that in-house?
I don't believe the wage study is in part of this. It'd be more of a CIP or programming.
Yeah, usually more for projects and capital improvement projects. Buildings and facilities, we had several requests. We have, as you can see on here, we have 4 requests that we recommended for a total funding of $94,000, a little over $94,000. We had budgeted $110,000 out of sales tax. There's 2 projects on here for the solid waste fund, or the utility fund, and then 2 projects on here for the solid waste fund that are projects. So the second tab that I don't have the detail of these in there, but if you want detail on any of these, most of the departments are here. If you have questions on what it is or something like that. I will say that several of these requested more than what we recommended for them, but we did at least give them some money to do that, so that they could do some of the repairs that they were requesting.
Question.
Yep.
Crematory repairs? Is that the animals?
Animal shelter, sir.
Right.
Yeah, I thought we were outsourcing that service.
We outsource some of it, but we still do our local, what I call roadkill and animals like that. We still do that in-house.
Yeah, we actually used to do intake and then in place of other providers. So we limited what we do, and we're not competing, or we're receiving it and then transporting it to other communities. We cut it back to just what's our essential function, but we still have need for crematory.
Any other questions on this page?
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Or grizzly.
No. Park improvements, our plan is to use the park master plan and go through that list of priorities that we discussed earlier in the summer. This is $194,000. That's pretty much an annual amount that we can spend based on what's coming in from the special alcohol fund. Streets has kind of 3 categories. There's the support from gas tax, the support from sales tax, and then the federal fund exchange dollars that they would get from KDOT. They kind of, every year they categorize how much they think they're going to do in each of these pretty generic projects, and then they'll come in with the specific projects, get the bids out, and bring those to you for approval as they get those bids and to award those bids. System enhancements, these are things that Martha sees the current needs for her utility systems. She'll bring these forward every year and typically gets them all done when she can. But these are just typical maintenance routine things that she needs to do to her system throughout. Every year she'll transfer those. Then we get to vehicles and equipment. The first line item on here is the ambulance, and that's budgeted out of the general fund, but it is reimbursed by the county, so that's in the general fund. The next section is all of the vehicles and equipment that we budget out of sales tax. And as you remember when we went through this earlier in the year where we had those bids, this is that long list of items that will go out for bid for early in the year. And then as we get those bids back, we'll bring those to you to approve for award.
And we talked about this before, but I would tell you that this is a real struggle, the general fund and sales tax funding in particular. And if things rise to the top due to their age and their importance, you see a lot of public safety, you see a lot of outdated equipment, but we are just not funded currently to keep up with a routine, a cycle that would be more balanced. We find ourselves really struggling with this.
This is a continuation of vehicles and equipment out of the other funds, so out of the sanitation fund, the solid waste fund, and the utility fund. This is their request for their equipment and vehicles that they have annual replacement programs on.
Just one quick one, vehicle number 121 wrecked in 2019, what?
I'm waiting to see that on there. I assume that's probably the one in Public Works.
The dump truck, is that the same one we're already replacing?
Correct, that's the dump truck that flipped over. There was a.
It's not the fire one, though. It's a different
No.
one. Yeah, this is a different one.
Yeah, we had a windy conditions passed by a semi, and the combination of being sucked one way and blown the other way caused them to go end over end on Old 40. And totaled the dump truck. So combination of insurance proceeds and replacement costs.
Okay.
So that kind of concludes the sub-CIP portion of those items that we looked at. Now, I will say, all of the dollar amounts that are on that list were approved in the budget. So we have those dollars budgeted and approved through the budget. It's just the detail that we're kind of going over today. In the 5-year capital improvement program, again, this is information that we saw this summer. The 2020 projects, the new ones that we had proposed were the water rights at Canopolis for the river project, the river renewal, the trail over there in Ohio that we have the grant match for. And then we've continued to add Smoky Hill River renewal. A couple other new ones were the replacement of the fire apparatus, the basketball floors at TPAC, self-contained breathing apparatus for the fire department, and we have the emergency radio project in here. The other one new in the utility fund is the treatment plant design. So I've kind of broken out here what the total cost is for this year and the amount that we would have to finance, the annual debt payment, and where that money is coming from, our intent will be.
And I know we're short on time, but I don't know that we've reported the most recent update on our NPDES permit and conditions as it relates to the wastewater treatment plant. Marcy, can you touch on that quickly?
Sure, we got our permit expires at the end of 2019, and so we'll get a new, typically it's a 5-year permit, and so it will expire in 2024. We have a schedule of compliance in there that requires a basis of design report or design memo to KDHE by 10/1/2020, final plans and specifications to KDHE by 10/1/2021, and then we start construction at the beginning of January 2022. 2 years of construction to be complete by 12/31/2023, then a year of operation to 12/31/24. So they used up all 5 of the years. So we study for about a year, we design for about a year, we build for 2 years, then we operate it for a year and make sure we meet our permit limits. Is kind of maybe that's an easier way than all the dates, but that's the schedule they laid out for us. Sounds like a long time, but started working on planning that schedule and putting it together, and it seems like I've got a lot of work to get done, so sounds good in the beginning. But
We've talked about that a number of times. We kind of knew it was coming, but this permit has made it official.
Just one thing on the self-contained breathing, do they last 15 years? It's no sort of finance, an option to finance
Yeah.
15?
Yeah, the ones we're using now are from 2003, so, yeah.
So they do last
15-year
that
life will be.
Debbie, I'm sorry.
Well, no, either way,
Oh, right.
can you do some damage in 3 minutes? Get through this?
I think Commissioner Hodges had a question.
Yeah.
Just one quick question. For 2020, if my addition is correct, it looks like we would have about 4.358 on an annual, for our annual sales tax. We'd have the commitment, we'd have the 50,000, 500,000, and 3.2.
Yes.
Okay, so, all right, so we'd be looking at about 4.35 or 4.4 on, that's coming out of sales tax. total in 2020?
The first three items are paid out of cash. Those are budgeted as line items out of sales tax annually.
Right, right.
So those wouldn't be coming out of debt service. And then, well, so that's a cash appropriation. And then the rest of it, the 23,000, the 70,000, and then if we get to the 515,000, those would be debt payments out of sales tax. So yes, that's correct.
Right, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
I will say with conversation with Mark that construction schedule may be a little bit farther behind than we anticipate. So that may be delayed a little bit on that Smoky Hill Road based on the information she got from the Corps last week, 2 weeks ago? Yeah. But that's kind of where we have it in our plan, so that may not happen. Two projects that did not make it to the level of recommendation were the relocation of Station 4 and the saltwater feasibility building study. Also, this is where the attachment that I gave you, just the commissioners, is the detail of all these projects. It also has attached to the back all the ongoing projects that are out there, and also the ones that we've kind of come and gone with throughout the year, baseball and things like that. Those are all in that second sheet set of documents I gave you. So as we look through these, we know we're debt financing these. I wanted to provide some information on the debt service fund and where those dollars are coming from, how they're being paid for, and just to give you an idea of where we're at, because it does affect decisions beyond just doing these projects. So the debt service fund is anticipated to have about a little over $700,000 in at the end of 2019. The projects, because we have current debt on some projects, but we don't have current debt on a lot of these projects that we're looking at, I wanted to give you a list of those projects because I have some graphs here in the next couple tables that kind of add these projects to what those numbers will look like. So these will be the projects that I'm talking about when I say to include other projects. So our current debt payment schedule on the left-hand side by type of project, which is how it's supported: property tax, special sales tax, or special assessment, sales tax, the utility fund, solid waste, and from the utility revenue. Kind of gives you a picture of where those projects show up as far as what our debt payments are. The graph on the right shows those with the projects that I just showed you in the previous slide and how that affects that kind of graphic. So you can see the purple line, which is the sales tax line, moves up to about $1.5 million, where it was under $1 million in the prior, with the current projects. And then we always want to know how we're paying for these. So I just wanted to give you kind of the concept of what we go through when we look at this and how we determine how much is coming out of sales or property tax. So we determine how much our payments are going to be. That's the top schedule for each year. That's based on the amortization schedules that we've been given from bond counsel or financial advisors. They give us a list of all the payments. And then we take into account what are our sources of revenue. And a couple of things that kind of affect that property tax are, we have motor vehicle tax and delinquent property tax that come into effect. That's about $420,000 a year. We have transient guest tax going to the debt service fund, and that's for the debt on TPEC. And that's going out there until about, I think it's 2034 or 2037. I can't remember exactly which date. So that's about $240,000 a year. We have a transfer from the sales tax fund that we've kind of allocated for just projects in general, not specific projects, of $650,000. We have our special assessments that we bill annually. We have our transfer from sales tax for specific projects, which would be the police firing range, the river renewal, the river project, and some of those projects. We have money that comes from the utility funds for their debt, and so that kind of gives me a fill-in amount for where the property tax is going to be. So this kind of gives you an idea of around anywhere from $2 million to $2.7 million, and then it continually goes down as we pay some of those bond issues off over the years. I had that in a graphic, but I guess I didn't put that in here. But that's basic, I mean, I was just kind of trying to give you some basic ideas of what was going on. I did mention we will be bringing this back for commission approval, hopefully around November 25th. But if you have any questions about a specific project
Well, if you
or
have
doubts.
questions, write them down in succinct form right now. Stay there. We're gonna go to public session for all of 6 minutes. And then, anyone have anything, excuse me, that they want to bring up related to what we've been talking about or anything else? Going once, twice, thrice. Okay, any questions? We'll get them to you.
So this is, we've seen this before. We didn't add anything or really change any numbers. It's just a formality of showing it to you again, and then just so that you have an opportunity to see it again before we bring it for formal approval at the end of November. And if you have any questions, let me know. We'll be glad to answer them before that time.
All right. We have a personal break time. See you at 4 o'clock.